wife and I had a lot of struggles in the early years of our marriage, and maybe that's why I am so empathetic with other people who are struggling. But we found answers, and I know that there are answers, and so I've invested my life really trying to help people. And all of my writing basically is an outgrowth of my counseling, marriage and family counseling. So that's who I am. That's where my heart is, and I do believe that if we have good family relationships, it's going to infect everything else we do in a positive way. And if you're struggling at home,
five
it's
love
going to
languages.
affect the business.
You wrote the book back in 1992. I assume obviously you started ahead of time. But what kind of led you to writing the book, your initial book? Why did you feel you needed to go and produce such a book with such content?
Well, I discovered in my counseling that what makes one person feel love does not make another person feel love. They would sit in my office and one of them would say, I just feel like he doesn't love me or she doesn't love me. And the other person would say, I don't understand that. I do this and this and this. Why would you not feel love? And I knew people were sincere, but they were missing each other emotionally. And so I eventually sat down and read several years of notes that I made and asked myself, when someone said they did not feel love, what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into 5 categories. And I later called them the 5 love languages and started using that concept in my counseling. And if you want her to feel love, you've got to learn to express love in her language. If you want him to feel love, you've got to express love in his language. And I would help them discover each other's language and challenge them to go home and try it. And sometimes they would come back in 3 weeks and say, Gary, this is changing everything. The whole climate's different now. And then I started using it with small groups of couples, and the same thing happened. It was probably 5 years later that I thought, if I could put this concept in a book, write it in the language of the common person, maybe I could help a lot of couples that I would never have time to see in my office. That's what motivated me to write the book. I knew the concept would help people.
So the root of it is truly service.
Absolutely. The very heart of it.
There are
The heart
5
of love is serving others.
Please telling us what those 5 love languages are.
Yeah, and they're in no particular order. One is words of affirmation, using words to affirm the other person. You look nice in that outfit. Really appreciate what you did. You know, one of the things I like about you, there's an ancient Hebrew proverb that says life and death is in the power of the tongue. You can kill the other person or give them life by the way you talk to them. But for some people, words of affirmation is their primary love language. It makes them feel love more than anything else. And then there's acts of service, doing something for the other person that you know they would like for you to do. In a marriage, that would be such things as cooking meals, washing dishes, vacuuming floors, washing the car, walking the dog, mowing the grass, changing the baby's diaper. Ooh, that's a big one. If you have a baby. Remember the old saying, actions speak louder than words.
Yes.
If this is your love language, actions will speak louder than words. And then there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. They were thinking about
Type to
it.
search the
Look
menus.
what they got from
Use
it.
the up and down
The gift
arrows
doesn't
to
have to be
cycle through
expensive.
results.
Haven't
Use
we
the
always
left and
said
right arrows to
it's the
adjust the
thought that
text
counts?
parrot and to move
But
the
I
gift
remind
tab
you,
created.
it's not the thought
From box
left in your
options.
head that counts.
Increase
It's the
pitch.
gift that came
2 of
out
2.
of the thought in
Words.
your head.
1 of 2.
I
None.
sometimes
1
say
of
to
3.
guys, hey,
Play at normal
you
volume
can get
even if
free
Pro
flowers
Box is
in
speaking.
the spring and
1
summer.
of 3.
In most places,
System.
go out in your backyard and pick one. That's what your kids do. How many mothers have ever received a dandelion from your kids? Yeah. And if you don't have any flowers in your backyard, check out your neighbor's yard. Don't steal them, ask them. They'll give you a flower. And then there's quality time. Giving them your undivided attention. TV is off, computer is down, we're not answering our phone, we're looking at each other, and they have our full attention. Quality time. You don't always have to be sitting down. You can be taking a walk down the road or going out to eat, assuming that you're talking to each other. You know, how many of us have seen couples in a restaurant where both of them have got their phone out and they're looking down at their screen and they're not talking to each other? That's not quality time, even though it's proximity. And then number 5 is physical touch. We've long known the emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies, hold them, kiss them, cuddle them, long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love. The baby feels love. Now, in a marriage, this would be such things as holding hands, kissing, embracing, the whole sexual part of marriage, arm around the shoulder, driving down the road, you put your hand on their leg, sitting around the house, and they walk by, you trip them. No, don't trip your spouse, okay? Affirming touches. And the simple idea is this. Out of those five, each of us has, as I said earlier, a primary love language. One of them speaks more deeply to us than the others. It's very similar to spoken language. Every one of us grew up speaking a language with a dialect, and that's the one we understand best. We call it our native tongue. I grew up speaking English Southern style, okay? But every one of us grew up with a language and a dialect. Same thing is true with love. And if we don't learn to speak the other person's love language, they will not feel loved, even though in your mind you are loving them. So that's the basic concept. Simple concept, but it can transform relationships.
Absolutely. When you and I were talking the other day, I told you the story about me. You know, I'm in my mid 40s, somewhere around there. You know, who's counting? And I just recently, after having conversations with my wife back and forth, we discovered our love languages. So my love language is touch. Absolutely love if my wife runs her, fingers through my hair or rubs my back. I love massages. Not that I'm, loving the masseuse, but I just like the idea of touch, right? And my wife's is acts of service. I go do the dishwasher or, change the baby's diaper if I take the garbage out or something, which is so menial to me. It's not a big deal. It's like I'm a superhero to her. So my question to you is this. For those individuals that don't understand what their love language is, what can people do to discover their own love language and then build upon that? Their own love language.
Yeah, I'll give you three informal ways, and then I'll give you another way. One is to observe your own behavior. How do you typically respond to other people? If you're always giving other people words of affirmation and encouragement, probably that's your love language, because we tend to speak our own language. If you're always giving people high fives and pats on the back, probably physical touch is your language. So just observe your own behavior. Which one of these do you see coming out of you as you relate to other people? Secondly, what do you complain about most often? The wife who says, well, we just don't spend any time together. I feel like we're ships passing in the night. Is telling you that quality time is her primary love language. You see, we tend to get defensive. And the husband might say, what do you mean don't spend time together? We went to dinner just last night.
Just leave it. Put it on the table so she can see your whole body.
Going to dinner. She's talking about giving her your undivided attention. So whatever you complain about reveals your love.
Watch those eyes.
And then what do you request most often? The request reveals the love language. Our daughter, when she was a teenager, would say to me 2 or 3 nights a week, Dad, can we take a walk after?
I'm trying to learn as well, yeah?
She was asking me for quality time. So what do you ask for most often of the other person, whether it's your spouse or your friend or whatever? You put those 3 things together, you can pretty well figure out your language. Now, you can also go online and take a free quiz. 5lovelanguages.com. The number 5. 5lovelanguages.com. There's a quiz for married couples. There's a quiz for single adults. There's a quiz for teenagers. And there's a little game you play with children as well. They told me the other day, the folks who operate that for me, that on the couples event, couples profile, 50 million people have taken that free profile. And I told them, I said, you guys should have been charging $1 a piece. They said, no, we're just trying to help people get the idea.
Wow. So now we know how to understand our own. What can we do, right, to then encourage or fully understand our spouse's love languages? What are some exercises, some things that we can do to build upon that for those that are married? And what I'm asking is this, give you a little more background. In our business, we have a lot of couples that work together. A lot of couples. We have a lot of people that are dating that work together. It's the culture inside our company. So for their perspective, we run and gun pretty hard in business. We're all entrepreneurs here. We don't work 9 to 5 jobs. It's not a Monday through Friday type of opportunity that we have here for our entrepreneurs. We have a very unique culture here. So what can we do in terms of discovering each other's, right, and maybe some exercise we can do to really enhance those?
Well, I think ideally, each of you can go online and take the quiz to start with.
Okay.
And it'll give you your primary love language, your secondary love language, and the others underneath that. That would be an ideal starting place. You can also apply the same 3 things that I gave earlier. Observe their behavior. How do they typically respond to other people? Not just you, but other people as well. And what do they complain about? And what do they request of you most often? You take those 3 things, you can pretty well figure out their language. Now, knowing the person's language and speaking it is 2 different things. I mean, a lot of people have said to me, I know about the love languages. I say, are you speaking your spouse's love language or your child's or whatever? Well, I'm trying, you know, which says to me, they're not really taking it seriously. They're not really applying it. So I think for husbands and wives who work together, or whether they're dating couple working together, yes, a lot of your time is spent on the business, to be sure. If you have children at home, a lot of your time is going to be spent with children as well. But the primary relationship in a family is the husband-wife relationship. And the greatest thing you can do for your children, relationship-wise, is to give them a model of a mom and dad who are loving each other, supporting each other, caring for each other, working together as a team. And so this helps you know how to invest the time you have in the most effective manner. Listen, we all have the same amount of time, and we choose what we do with it. And so if you know that your spouse or the other significant person in your life, if this is their love language, why would you not want to speak? Now, I did have a husband say to me some time ago, he said, Gary, I read your book. My wife and I took the profile, and she tells me that her love language is acts of service. But I'll tell you and her, if it's going to take my washing dishes and my vacuuming floors for her to feel loved, she can forget that. And I say, that's your choice. If you choose to live with a wife who has an empty love tank, that's your choice. I said, I prefer to live with a wife who has a full love tank. I've lived with both. Same woman, early years, empty love tank. Later years, full love tank. I much prefer the latter woman. So that is my wife's love language. And that is why I vacuum floors, and I wash dishes, and I take out the trash. And she tells me I'm the greatest husband in the world. I know that's hyperbole, but it still feels good to me.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think once you know the language and you know how important it is, because listen, almost everyone agrees, our deepest emotional need on the human level is to feel loved by the significant people in our lives. And if you're married, the most significant person is your spouse. And if you indeed feel loved by your spouse, life is pretty beautiful. But if your love tank is empty and you feel like they don't love me, they wish they weren't married to me, life begins to look pretty dark. So, it's a choice. Love is a choice. And love does not start with a feeling. Love starts with an attitude. Now, falling in love starts with a feeling, okay? I cover that in the book too. We fall in love. We get this euphoric feeling for the other person, and we want to be with them all the time. And when we're away, we're thinking about them. But that has an average lifespan of 2 years. You know, I was told growing up, if you've got not 6 months, it's going to last forever. No. It has an average lifespan of 2 years, and we come down off that high. That's when the love language becomes extremely important, that we know how to communicate love to the other person.
So, we'll go a couple different ways of this. We're getting somewhere, and I'm very excited about this because I'm thinking about a lot of things. So, you've coached, how many people have you coached in your career? Tens of thousands?
I have no idea. I hadn't kept records.
What would you say the most common issues are for spouses that you've coached, if you can recall, that work together? You know, because the separation between house and business can get very blurry. So what are some of the common issues that spouses can face when building a business together that you've come across in the past?
I think one is that we assume that proximity, that is being together in the business and being together at home, is all that it takes. We're just living in the same house. We're in close proximity. We know something of what each other's doing. And so consequently, we just assume that everything's fine. And we really don't often take time to listen to each other. I say one of the best things you can do is have a 15-minute time every day in which you sit down and listen. See, we often say, let's sit down and talk, which means I want to tell you something. No, I say, let's sit down and listen. I want to hear what's going on in your life. And they say, well, we know what's going on because we see each other all day. I say, yeah, but you don't know what they've been thinking. And you don't know what they've been feeling. So what if you say, I didn't show you. What are some of your thoughts today? What have you been feeling today? And you just listen to them and let them share and express understanding. You don't have to solve anything. You just express understanding. And then you do the same for them. See, most of us have to learn to listen. We talk by nature. We have to learn to listen. But you have that little check-in time every day, you know, and some of the times you might also say, how are we doing? How are we doing? They say, well, honey, whatever they feel, well, okay, what do we need to do? What do I need to do that's going to make things better? You're just checking in with each other to make sure that you're on the same page, to make sure that needs are being met, to make sure that you both still feel connected. Otherwise, you can go for weeks and months and just assume that everything's fine. When in reality, you don't feel connected to each other, and you don't feel loved. So that's the most common thing, is that couples just take for granted that the relationship is okay because we're with each other every day.
Right. And there are the misconceptions, obviously, and my partner Andrew Gaines, who spoke right before you had come up, you may have heard him speaking. The big misconception between quantity of time versus quality of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, absolutely. There has to be some quantity of time. That's why I think a daily time, I said 15 minutes, that's a good starting place. Because some people, if they haven't done it, 15 minutes might be like a long time. But there has to be some quantity of time. But quality time is what we're after, is staying genuinely connected to each other and making sure we're plugged into each other's needs and their thoughts and their feelings.
Interesting. Now, the two sexes. Battle of the sexes, okay? Men and women, have you noticed throughout your years of counseling, all the people you've counseled and helped get to a better place in their marriages, relationships, and everything, is there a love language that leans more towards the male species? Is there a love language that leans more towards the female species? And I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble here when I'm asking. I just, obviously want to get a general idea. Is there one that you've noticed? Any trends there?
I'll tell you what many men will say.
Okay.
They will hear the concept, and they will say to themselves, and sometimes say it out loud, I know my love language, physical touch. Physical touch.
Oh, got it. Go figure.
And they're thinking the sexual part of the marriage. And I say to them, well, maybe that is your language, but let me ask you a question. Do non-sexual touches make you feel loved? And first of all, they look at me like a deer in the headlights. Or are there non-sexual touches? And I say, well, let's imagine that the two of you get out of the car, you're walking into the shopping mall, and she reaches over and holds your hand as you walk into the mall. Does that make you feel loved? And if he says, no, that really kind of irritates me. I said, okay, let's say she's pouring you a cup of coffee, and she puts her hand on your shoulder while she pours the coffee. Does that make you feel loved? And if he says, not really, then I say physical touch is not your language, okay? You like the sexual part of marriage, but it's not your love language, okay? Listen, there's a huge difference between males and females when it comes to sexuality. That's another whole issue, okay? But don't assume that all men have physical touch. And no, there's not the one of these that leans more to women and one leans more to men. They're pretty well even. given in my hand. They're not gender specific. A man can have any one of the five, a woman can have any one of the five. It's their primary.
Got it. Okay. Now, any of them out of the 5 love languages, are there any of them that are the most misunderstood?
Oh, I don't know. Nothing really jumps into my mind in terms of misunderstanding. I think sometimes people have a whole lot of questions about gifts, and they say, "Well, isn't that just it's kind of materialistic?" Well, if it's not your language, you may well think that, and you may well see it that way. But if it is your language, that's not what you see. It's not materialism. They were thinking about me. You can buy their favorite candy bar when you're shopping and bring it home and say, "Honey, I was thinking about you today, and I got you or whatever." Yeah, it's that you're thinking about me, and for them, the gift says what these other languages say to other people. Here's the problem, I think. Our number 5, that is the one that's least important to us. It's hard for us even to imagine that it would be number 1 for somebody else. Because in our mind, it's just nothing, you know. It's meaningless almost. But if you can understand that the way you feel when they speak your primary love language, that's the way they feel when you speak their primary love language. So don't discredit your spouse and say, "Well, that's just this or that's just that, or you shouldn't feel that way. You should, no. I understand why you have a hard time understanding it, but you just believe it. If they say that's their love language, you believe it, and you just choose to speak it, and you'll begin to see a difference in their behavior. Because when we feel loved, we're different. We're different in the way we respond to you, and we're different in the way we see our own life when we feel loved by the significant people in our lives.
You know what I'm thinking about right now? We're going to have a bunch, because our people are, again, very unique in our company. I know what's happening already behind the scenes. The spouses are now elbowing each other, because we got people all over the country looking at this. There's a lot of spouses on their couches at their home, and there's a lot of people in offices as well. And right now, they're probably all nudging each other, saying, "You want me to change? You got to speak my language." I can literally, Dr. Chapman, I see it happening, knowing our team and the culture we have here. It's going to be very interesting. So, kids. Let's transition a little bit on the kids side. I'm a parent. I have 2 beautiful kids. I have a 5-year-old, and we have an 8-year-old as well. I say I was the biggest part of it. Clearly, my wife is the bigger part of it. But we have a 5-year-old, and we have a 8-week-old at home. And a lot of our spouses, and including individuals, unfortunately, there's a lot of single moms, which usually as a counselor, a lot of single dads in our country. And we have a lot of them in our company that are building businesses. So when it comes to the love language of children, could you speak on that a little bit? Obviously, you wrote a book about it. You can talk about that as well, because I told you when we spoke the other day, I got a lot of value from that. My wife and I talk about it. Oh, Eden's love language is this, but sometimes it switches back and forth. So when it comes to kids, how do we kind of discover their love language? You talked a little bit about it. What do we do in that area?
Well, the question is not, do you love your children? The question is, do your children feel loved? I remember a 13-year-old young man in my office for counseling. He had run away from home, and he ended up in my office. And among other things, he said to me, "My parents don't love me. They love my brother, but they don't love me." I knew his parents. I knew they loved him. The problem is they had never discovered his primary love language. And he saw his brother being loved, likely in his own language. So, the key is to learn the child's love language. Now, you can actually learn a child's primary love language by the time they're 4 years old. Most children. By observing their behavior. For example, my son's love language is physical touch. He's grown now. He's an adult now. But when he was that age, and I would come home from work, he would run to the door, grab my legs, and climb on me. He's touching me because he wants to be touched. Our daughter never did that. She would say, "Daddy, come into my room. I want to show you something." She wanted quality time. She wanted my undivided attention. Now, when they were teenagers, she's the one who would say, "Dad, can we take a walk after dinner?" My son would never walk with me. He said, "Walking is dumb. You're not going anywhere. If you're going somewhere, drive." He would say, "Daddy, can we play basketball? Can we play basketball?" And the way we played basketball in the backyard, it was physical, okay? So, you can discover a child's love language rather early. it tends to stay with them for a lifetime. But now here, please don't hear me saying you only speak the child's primary love language. No, 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 no. You give heavy dosage of the primary, but you sprinkle in the other four, because we want the child to learn how to receive love and eventually give love in all five languages. That's the healthiest adult. Most of us did not receive all five growing up. And so we get to adulthood and we didn't receive them, and we don't know quite how to do them. Of course, the good news is you can learn them, even if you didn't receive them. But we want the child to learn how to receive all five and eventually speak all five. And all five are important. But if you don't give heavy doses of the primary, they still may not feel loved, even though you're doing some of the others. So that's the big factor in terms of children. Now, this also has implications in terms of discipline. And in terms of, for a child, let me just throw this out quickly.
Please.
You have a rule for your children. We don't do this and we do this, whatever. Whatever rule you have, determine the consequences of breaking the rule at the same time you tell them what the rule is. For example, we don't throw the ball inside the house, okay? We throw it outside but not inside. If you do, then the ball has to go in the trunk of the car for 2 days, okay? And if you break something, we'll have to pay for it out of your allowance, okay? Kids got it, you got it, mom's got it, daddy's got it, everybody knows what's going to happen. Now, if the child does throw the ball in the house, wrap the discipline in love. For example, if their love language is words of affirmation, you say, Johnny, I love you so much, and I'm so proud of you, because you seldom break the rules. But this time you did break the rule, and you threw the ball in the house, and you broke the vase. So you know what has to happen, right? We have to put the ball in the trunk of the car for 2 days. And I don't know how much the vase costs, but we'll have to find out and start taking it out of your allowance, okay? But listen, man, I love you, and I'm so proud of you, because you seldom break the rules. And Johnny walks away feeling that's fair. But if you just let your emotions control you, and you say, I told you not to throw the ball in the house, blah, 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 blah. Johnny walks off feeling, I try hard to do right. Do one thing wrong and I get clobbered. And he doesn't respond well. So you follow those guidelines, you'll find your discipline will be much more effective in terms of changing the child's behavior.
So what you're saying is, to clarify, because I think a lot of people that are listening right now are getting a lot of takeaways from that. You open with love, you give the discipline, you end with love. You end on a high.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with you, how I grew up, and a lot of other people. It's an interesting place that we live. I think a lot of kids, unfortunately, when a parent wants to discipline, they don't do that part. And I've done it myself for my kids. That's a very about one time, and I obviously read your 5 love languages of your kids, which I absolutely love that book that you wrote. There was an exercise that you could do with your children, because again, we have so many parents in the company that are wanting to fight and do something big for their kids. Leave a legacy for their kids, much like you, I assume, are doing for many, many people in the country. What was the exercise, again, the alternative choice, if you could speak on that, for them to discover their kids' language? You give them options. You recall what I'm referring to?
Sure, yeah.
To do the exercise with your kids?
Yeah. There's several things you can do in addition to what we said already to discover the child's language. Especially if they're a little older. You give them a choice between two things. You say, for example, Johnny, I got a free hour. If we could take a walk in the park, just you and me, or we could go buy that ball glove if you wanted. Which would you rather do? Give them a choice, and they choose. One is a gift, the other's quality time. And then you can bring in all 5 of them. Just along the way, over a period of weeks, give them choices over 2 things. Keep a record of what they choose, and they will choose their love language most often. Okay? So that's another way to discover their. Now here's another one, especially if they're teenagers. This can be painful for parents. You say to the teenager, I've been thinking a lot about my life recently, and especially how I could be a better husband to your mother, or a better wife to your father, and how I could be a better father to you and your sister. And so what I want to ask is, if you could change anything about me, What would you like to see changed?
Wow.
Get ready. Their answer may hurt, but it will tell you what their love language is. One son said to his father, he said, Dad, I just wish that sometimes I could please you. It seems to me like no matter what I do, no how good I do, you always say, I should have done better. I should have done better. I should have done better. And I try hard, but I just feel like I don't ever please you. He's telling you that words of affirmation is his language, and he's not getting it from you. One young lady said to her mother, she said, well, Mom, I'll tell you if you won't get mad at me. I feel like I don't ever have your full attention. You're always doing something. You're doing needlework, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're on the phone, you're always doing something. And when I ask you a question, you're still always doing something. I don't ever feel like I have your full attention. Okay, it hurt, but she learned the love language of her daughter is quality time. So, yeah, that's a painful way, but it's a good way, especially for teenagers. They won't just walk up and tell you, but if you ask them if they think you're sincere. Now, they may brush it off the first time you ask and say, oh, well, you're a good dad, you're a good dad, you're a good mom. If you come back a week later and ask the same question, when they realize you're sincere, they'll open up and they'll tell you.
Dr. Chapman, is it for parents with teenagers? We live in a world today, social media driven, the influence and the power of media over our kids, our teenage kids, even over us, is astronomical today because of the world we live in. You know, instant world, instant gratification, microwave world, whatever you want to call it. What are some things outside of that you mentioned that we can do with our teenage kids? Is it similar to the love languages with your spouse? Like, hey, you know, asking questions. What are some exercises parents can do with their teenage kids to nurture their relationship, better their relationship with their parents? What can they do?
You know, I think one of the most fundamental things that we can do to improve communication between mom, dad, teenagers, and younger children is to have a meal time together once a day. TV is not on in the background. Radio is not playing in the background. You might have faint music if you if you want it, but we're looking at each other. Yeah, I did a survey some time ago with teenagers, and I found out, it's a little foggy right now. I think it was 75% said that they did have a meal with their family once a day, most days. I thought, well, that's pretty good. But then I found out that almost half of those who had a meal said that during the mealtime, one of them was reading a book, one of them was on their phone, and one of them was doing something else. In other words, they were just eating together. They weren't communicating. And so if you just have a time to say, you know, with our family, say, you know, we're going through something, if you haven't been doing this, we're going to do something a little different. When we eat our meal together, we're going to share life with each other. And we're not going to be watching television, we're not going to be distracted by the computer and the phones, we're not going to answer phones. And we're going to start out by, because you have to give them some guidelines, we're going to start out by, everybody's going to tell us 2 things that happened in their life today and how they feel about them. So little Johnny can tell 2 things, and Mary can tell 2 things, and how they felt about it. So this is just a way of opening up conversation, communication. And you do this for a while, and then they can start talking, feel free to talk, and they know this is an important time for us. In fact, our kids look back and say to us, they're grown now, and our daughter has her own kids. But they look back and they say, you know, we're looking back on our childhood, and one of the most significant things was that meal we had together. I remember our son brought home some friends from college, and we did the same thing when they were there. And later they said to him in private, does your family do that all the time? Man, we've never spent so much time at the meal, because 30 minutes after the meal, we're still talking. You know? So that's a good starting point. Then I think you play to the teenager's interest.
Okay.
If they're into music, you get into music. If they're into sports, you get into sports. if they're into philosophy, not likely you get into philosophy. I remember when our son was a teenager, Buddy Holly was real big. Well, you're probably too young to remember Buddy Holly.
No, I know who he is, absolutely.
So I said to him, I think Derek was about 14. I said, Derek, I've got to go to Fort Worth, Texas to speak. Why don't you go with me, man? And when we get through, you and I'll drive out to Lubbock, and we'll discover Buddy's hometown. Oh, Dad, I'd love to do that. I had no idea how far it was from Fort Worth to Lubbock. It's a long ride. But we rode out there together, talked about Buddy Holly. We went to the schools that he went to the church where he was married, and where they had his funeral. We went to where he played his first record. I mean, we did the whole, went to the cemetery. We did the whole thing. And all the way back, we were talking about, I wonder what would have happened if Buddy Holly hadn't got killed in that plane crash. And I wonder about this, and I wonder about that, and I wonder about that. Now, I have to be honest, I wasn't so much into Buddy Holly myself. I was into my son, okay? And if he's into Buddy Holly, I'm into Buddy Holly. And then a year or two later, we went up to Bruce Springsteen's home in New Jersey and checked that out. So doing things with a child, it interfaces with their interests, man, it builds memories that they'll remember for years.
Sharing their interests and speaking their language. It's beautiful. So transitioning. Business. In our company, we have a lot of teams. In our company, the backbone of what we do and how we built our organization and how we build organizations within the company is all leadership. Working with different people, mentorship programs. From a business perspective, how do the 5 love languages translate to someone who's building a team of 10, 15, 20, 30, 100, 1,000 life insurance professionals? Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, through the years, since that book came out originally, people would say to me, Gary, I know you wrote your original book for married couples,